And so Emily and I, we dated for, I think it was 8 years we dated before we got married. And then we are going on our 13th year. So in August, that'll be 13 years of marriage. Now, in that time, a lot has happened. All right, so we dated, we went to separate colleges, and she went to school in New York, I went to school in New Brunswick. After that, we got married, and we both got jobs. I pastored a church, and she was an admissions counselor for a college in the States that she went to. And after that, we both got our masters. She became a school teacher, and we completed our kind of degrees in our master's program. After that, we kind of continued down the road of having kids, and we moved back from the U.S. to Canada, and I became the pastor here at Southgate, and then we've had 3 children, and currently we have 3 children and 1 exchange student living with us, and then we have a dog, and we've lived in 2 countries, and we have kind of been going as quickly as we can and trying to do the best that we can. And currently I pastor Southgate, and Southgate is a growing and kind of developing church, and I oversee a staff here at Southgate. Now, do I say all that stuff to tell you the accomplishments of Emily and I and our marriage? No, I don't tell you that to kind of brag or to boost my ego. I tell it to you to ask you this. Do you think that it has been smooth sailing for us the whole time we've been married? Do you think that your pastor and his wife just have this like perfect relationship and we don't argue? Our voices never get raised. And we always communicate well with each other. And I always keep her on the same page as myself. And we have the same likes. And we have the same interests. And this is just like we live in harmony all the time. Do you think that's the reality? Because I will tell you, in fact, my wife will probably tell you that it's not. I mean, we have a great marriage. We have a great relationship. We are great friends. And we are very much in love. But it's not always easy. It's not always easy. It's not easy for your pastor and his wife, and it's not easy for you because I could make some blanket statements here. I could say that no marriage is perfect. It's not. No friendship is perfect because it's not. And no parent-child relationship is perfect because it's not. In fact, no relationship altogether. There is not a relationship in this world that is perfect. You know why? Because we live in a world that isn't perfect, because we live in a fallen world, and because we are not perfect ourselves. And so we need to look to the only one who is perfect. And who is that? It's God, right? And so the story of Hosea. Now let me plan this out for you. Let me set the stage for you in what is going on in the book of Hosea. And I'm going to read this kind of short for you, and you can follow along, and so you can get a feeling, you can get a vibe for what is taking place and what's happening in this book of the Bible, in the storyline we're going to tackle for the next little while. And so, she was always good company. I mean, a little heavy on the lipstick maybe, but she was a little less choosy about her men than you might expect. She was a little less choosy about her booze than you might expect. She was loud, but she was great at a party. She was the life of a party, in fact. She was always good for a laugh. And then this guy came along wearing a sandwich board. And on the front of the sandwich board, it read, "The end is at hand." And on the back of the sandwich board, it read, "Watch out." Now, the first time that sandwich board man asked her to marry him, she laughed because she thought that he was totally joking when he asked her. Now, the second time, she thought he was serious, but she also thought he was crazy. The third time that he asked her to marry him, she said yes. I mean, he wasn't exactly a head turner, but he had a kind face, and he was totally generous. And he wasn't really all that crazier than anyone else, for that matter. Besides, any fool could tell that he was head over heels for her. Give or take a little, she even loved him back for a period of time. And they had 3 kids. We're not sure if all of them were his, but she knew that he loved her, and they raised these kids together. Of course, they had kind of odd names. For instance, one was "Not pitied for God, will no longer pity Israel now that it's gone to the dogs." That was his name. And so you can imagine at school, every time the roll was called in the classroom, the sandwich board man, Hosea, would give this message off even through the name of his child. It was a prophetic bullseye every time that kid's name was shared. I mean, if you looked at this marriage, everybody could see that it wasn't going to last. And let me tell you, it didn't. While Hosea was off hitting the sawdust trail, Gomer looked to hitting as many night spots as she could squeeze into an evening. And any resemblance between her next batch of children with Hosea was purely coincidental, if you know what I mean. It almost killed him, of course. And every time he caught himself almost raising a hand to her, he would burst into tears. And in a response, every time she raised one to him, he would be the one who would end up apologizing for it. He tried locking her out of the house a few times, and when she wouldn't be in by 5 a.m, but he always opened the door when she finally showed up. And if she couldn't help herself get into bed, he would help her out, lifting her into bed and pulling the covers over so she could get a good night's rest. Until one day, she didn't come home at all. And he thought to himself, this is it. I am through with this woman. I am serious about it this time. I'm not taking her back, but of course, as the story goes, we know that he did. As he looked for her day and night, he finally found her. She was lying passed out at a highly specialized establishment located above an adult bookstore. Her teeth had been knocked out, and you had to see her scars and bruises to believe them. Hosea had to pay a ransom for her. He had to contact the management of this establishment and buy her out of her contract that she had made. See, Hosea had her back again. And that's all that seemed to matter in this situation. And so he changed his sandwich board that he would wear around as any prophet would. And the front read like this now: God is love. And on the other side it read, and there is no end to it. And as he would walk around with that sandwich board, he would yell out at the top of his lungs on the street corners in which he stood, "How can I give you up, O Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? For I am God and not a man, the Holy One in your midst." Welcome to the book of Hosea. And so over the next 6 weeks, we're going to kind of tackle this story that we just laid out and look at the ins and outs, the in-depth understanding of what this thing means and what we can get out of it. And I'm excited about it because it is a story of love. It is a story of heartbreak. It is a story of redemption. And really, it's a story of pursuit. Now, the theme verse for this series is found in Hosea chapter 14, verse 4. It's just perfect for this entire series that we're going to be locking into for the next 6 weeks. And here's what it says. It says this: I will heal their apostate hearts so they won't turn away from me again. I will love them freely because I won't be angry with them anymore. And so we have this overview understanding of the book of Hosea, this overview picture that we really need to paint here today as we dissect this thing and move on into week 2 next week. You see, the overview is that Hosea is primarily a story all about love, and specifically about redemptive love. And so seeing things through and finding the redemption in the storyline. Now, the pain that Hosea has gone through in this marriage to an unfaithful woman who continually cheats on him, who continually walks out on him, who continually lies and breaks her promises in the covenant of marriage to him, it qualifies this guy to be one of the greatest prophets ever because he is living out the story of the nation of Israel, but in his married life. And so we see this kind of connection between the overall picture of Israel and God and his kids, and Hosea and Gomer. Israel has failed to trust God. And instead of trusting God, Israel time and time again looks to foreign powers for its protection and its security, and looks to foreign powers for its God. In fact, what they are doing, in effect, is committing adultery on their God. And in the book of Hosea, it paints this is Israel's spiritual idolatry with vivid images, calling God's people with warnings and heartfelt appeals, saying, you need to come back. You need to get on the straight and narrow. You need to honor your vows that you've made with me. And basically, the book of Hosea is this idea of failure to repent brings out punishment. And what we know, if you are a parent, what I've discovered is that punishing your kids is not fun. It's something that I don't love to do. I don't like to punish my kids. But I know it's a necessary, if I love them as their dad, to bring about corrective action in their lives, all right? And that's what the book of Hosea is all about. It's all about the leaving, some person breaking the vows, leaving the continual pursuit of God and the warnings that God gives us through his word and through our kind of prayer life and our understanding with him, and that he wants us back, but he will let us go if you don't want him. And so I think it's important to understand, where does this fit in the Bible? What's the historical background of this book? And so we find that Hosea, he's one of 12 minor prophets listed in the Old Testament. One of 12 minor prophets listed in the Old Testament. And you might want to know, what is a minor prophet? Well, a minor prophet is not, sometimes we think a minor prophet, there must be better prophets. Maybe he's not as good as the major prophet. And that's not the case. A minor prophet is a smaller book of the Bible, right? It's not like a worse type of person or not good enough. It is just a smaller book of the Bible. And so he's one of 12 minor prophets who ministered during the later half of the 8th century BC. And he is a prophet. And so we use the analogy of someone wearing the sandwich board, but he's not actually wearing the sandwich board, but he is a prophet. And we would understand a prophet as someone who speaks, God speaks through. And so God relays messages to his people through this individual. And that is what a prophet is all about. And he is a prophet to a specific group of people. And in fact, it's the northern kingdom of Israel called Ephraim. So Israel at the time has two different kingdoms, two different sections. We have the northern kingdom, which is Ephraim, and then we have the lower kingdom, which is the southern kingdom, which is Judah. Now at the time, Israel is rolling in it, man. They have like tons of money. They have tons of resources. They have tons of cash and wealth. They're doing really well. And they're doing so well primarily because their enemies, the neighboring empires, specifically the Assyrians, they are led by awful kings. And they aren't attacking. There's nothing really happening. And they're kind of diminished, while Israel is rising up in power and stature. And it is a great time for Israel. Now, Hosea comes on the scene when times are changing. Israel has seen great wealth and power, but after a series of kings that haven't ruled so well, their power is diminishing. And lo and behold, the Assyrians, that empire is rising rapidly. They had grown in power. They had become a dominant threat. And now we find that they're infiltrating the culture of the Israelites once again. And we find that at this time, many Israelites, they are turning to Baal worship. They are turning to the weather gods. They are turning to the fertility gods. And adultery against God is rampant. In fact, people are involved in blatant idol worship and idolatry. And so you can see what Hosea is getting himself into. We see that landscape that he's finding himself in at the time. The Assyrians are rising. Israel is falling. But let's check out the characters that are mentioned in this book. So we have a few dominant characters that we find in the book of Hosea. The first one is obviously Hosea himself. And what I love about the Old Testament when we read it is that every name means something. And it's important to look at the names of people as they relate to the story that's being told. And so Hosea, his name actually translates out to salvation, or he saves, or he helps. That's what his name means. And so whenever you say Hosea, it's actually meaning those things. Salvation, he saves, he helps. He is the husband of Gomer, and this is an arranged marriage, okay? God has told Hosea, you need to marry this woman, because it would normally be highly unlikely that these two would get together. But God has told Hosea, you need to marry Gomer. Hosea, he's often seen as a prophet of doom. And so he has this message of doom, but in the underlying current of his message, you see a promise. In the midst of destruction, you see this promise of redemption, right? And so you go into this valley kind of experience, but then you rise on the other side with a mountaintop restoration experience. Now his ministry, Hosea, his ministry lasts about 60 years, and he was the only prophet, get this, he's the only prophet of Israel at the time who actually wrote and left written prophecy for us. Let's look at the next character. We have Gomer. Gomer is the wife of Hosea, and her name translates out to complete. Now, oftentimes when we hear the word complete, we think of the positive connotation to complete, right? That you completed a task or you are made complete. But in this situation, what her name is actually meaning is she is completely fallen into sin. She has given herself completely over to her temptations and her desires. She is fully or completely immersed in this thing. And so whenever you hear her name, that's what you should think of. That's what you should understand as we go through the book. She is the daughter of Diblaim. Now, I looked up his name. This guy's name, it translates to double layers of grape cakes. Now, I don't even know what that's supposed to mean or how that fits into the story, but that's actually how his name translates out. And he was a deeply sensual man that is involved in sexual sin. And so we find that Gomer actually grew up with this in her household, and that is difficult because there's some generational things that are happening here, and this is what she knows. This is her life, and so it's kind of understandable in a sense that she falls into this with the rest of her life, as that's the way that she grew up. She is also divinely appointed by God in a marriage to Hosea. We find out that she is also listed as a prostitute. And then we have the kids. The kids play an important part in the story too, because their names, man, are names that you don't want, okay? So as we understand it, and if you look at what scholars write about this book, we find that we don't really know whose kids are whose here because of Gomer's lifestyle, but we would understand that 2 kids are not specifically Hosea's, although he's raising them, and 1 kid is Hosea's child. And so let's take a look at the first one. First one is a girl. Her name is Lo Ruhamah, and it translates out to not pitied. Not pitied. And so basically, as we mentioned before, in the roll call at school, wherever she goes, when people are saying her name, not pitied, it's actually a prophetic message. And so God has given this name to Hosea to name his child. And yeah, that stinks to have a name like not pitied. But whenever anyone calls her name or says her name, they're reminded of God's message through her name. Right? She is chosen by God as a sign of displeasure with the people of Israel. That's the first daughter. And then we have a son. One son's name is Lo Ami, and Lo Ami translates out to not my people. Okay? So again, imagine your name is not my people. So every time someone says this kid's name, they're reminded of the fact that God is not pleased, right? He's not pleased with his people. And in fact, like, you're not my people if you act this way. And then we have, finally, the third son. His name is Jezreel. And this is the son that we know Hosea and Gomer had together. His name is Jezreel. That is named actually after a valley of the same name, the Valley of Jezreel. And his name, interestingly enough, translates out to God sowed. And you can kind of do a character study on him and look that up as his life plays out. But God sowed, which is a different kind of message than the other 2 kids that were probably not Hosea's blood children. Now, to understand the story of Hosea is to also understand and realize our story. See, Hosea has been hurt time and time and time again by the very one that he loves, that he has chased, that he has been there for. He's built a life with this woman, Gomer. They have together raised these children. He's done everything to help the relationship, and he is forgiven over and over and over again. All that he has done has pursued and provided. And yet in the face of all that he's done, Gomer cannot resist the temptation that is in front of her. The lure of what she knows is wrong, she gives herself completely to. And yet, Hosea continues to pursue her. And so in this introductory look, to kind of whet your palate of this book, to better understand it as we jump into it next week, the questions that I want to leave you with here today are twofold. The first is, in what way do you think that Hosea advances the storyline of the Bible? And so what is God doing in the Bible, and how does Hosea fit in that storyline from what you've heard here today? And that's kind of what I want you to talk about in your life groups this week, all right? The second one is this. How does this book clarify our understanding of God's love for us? And so how do we see ourselves in our relationship with God? And how does that relate? How do we get that out of this story? I think a great scripture to kind of reference here is Romans 9, 25 and 26. And Paul kind of pulls some Hosea scripture and inserts it into the letter to the Romans. And he gives his people a little bit of warning, a little bit of context. And check that out as you jump into your life groups this week. And so normally we end the teaching every Sunday morning. We end the teaching by me praying at the end for you, the body, the family here at Southgate. I pray that that God would identify things in our lives, that He would mold and shape us, that we would grow closer to Him, that He would bless us, and that we would be able to respond to what He's leading us to do. But today, I am not praying for you. today I want you to pray for yourself. I want you to spend some time talking with God. And so what I've done here is I've written out a prayer for you to pray. And as you do, as you take time to reflect on this, to pray this prayer, would you at the same time listen to what God is telling you? Where do you fit, as far as to week 1 is concerned, where do you fit in the storyline of Hosea? And what has been the story of your relationship in your marriage, in your life, in your career, in your workplace, in your parental relationship, in your friendships, in your relationship with God? And do you identify with Hosea? Do you identify with Gomer? And what is God leading you to change? Check it out.